The door is binding slightly, a couple of places. So where the strike plates are, there's scraping on both of them. See if we can get those tightened in so they're not scraping anymore. Scraping and scraping. And also at the top of the door frame, we've got scraping as well. So there's a couple of contact points here where there's excessive rubbing, and we'll have to go ahead and see about addressing them. And also, we have to go ahead and double check and see if the door is actually nice and square inside its frame. We might have to go ahead and straighten out the frame itself, maybe go ahead and tighten up the hinges. We can see here on the top there's scraping of the metal, so this has definitely been rubbing against the top of the hole. So if we gently file it out, we should be able to go ahead and smooth it. If you find that your deadbolt is a little too tight when you're spinning it on the inside or with the key, loosening up the screws a bit, and especially loosening up the screws on the back on the deadbolt. After loosening them up, maybe lift them up, move them a little left or right, and then tightening up the screws gradually and just turning it and seeing if it smooths out. If it smooths out, then go ahead and just gently and gradually tighten up the screws until it's tight and doesn't move anymore. Sometimes when the mechanism gets a little loose, it shifts, it goes off center, and if it goes off center, it won't move smoothly as it tries to move the deadbolt. So just loosening up these screws and repositioning it slightly and then tightening again can often fix unnecessary grittiness, roughness, or tightness. And the same is true about the doorknob. So loosening it up and just repositioning it slightly and tightening could also help make it a lot smoother. This is the middle hinge of the door, and notice how this screw is particularly short. You can go ahead and change these screws out. Change them with screws that are much longer, say about 3 inches long, going into the door frame, and that will help secure the door. This is an outside door leading to the garage, so if you use longer screws on the door frame and longer screws on the door itself, it will strengthen the door. It'll make it a lot harder to kick and break open. Backing it out, loosening up all the screws, and we're tightening them back in. And this is to try and pull the door closer into the frame and giving it a little more clearance so the other side of the door won't keep scraping into the door frame. Pretty good. It's just a hair of scraping, almost unnoticeable. And same thing with the bottom strike plate here for the door knob. So let's go ahead and address that. Let's see if we can tighten up the screws on the strike plate. Okay. You can take some wooden boards and just, they can fit inside the door frame on either side, inside or outside of the door. And just take it and take a hammer and holding the wood up against the frame, just gently, or maybe not so gently, just hammer it. You want to use this wood because then that way the hammer is not striking the wood in the door frame and damaging things. This wooden board is going to go take the brunt of the impact from the hammer. So, but it's going to transfer enough blunt force to go ahead and force the frame back into the opening. And the same thing with the other side. So you can do the same thing by taking the wood and holding it up and gently hammering along the side. So that way you can help set the door frame back in. And you would do it from the outside and on the inside as well. You can use a metal bar to help hammer and set the door frame back in place. You would hold the metal bar up against the door frame here, usually in the middle, and then you would simply hammer with the hammer along the entire length of the bar. And then when you're done, you go ahead and just lift the bar up, hold it carefully, and then after holding it carefully, you hammer up and down the length of the bar. You'll be able to set the door frame further back into the mount, into the wall, and up against a stud. If you've already screwed these in and they're already flush and tight against the frame here, but your door locks or bolts are still scraping up against them, then you probably also want to hold the metal bar up against it and then just carefully hammer up and down the length of the bar, hoping to set the frame back in. So you also want to go ahead and do it for the entire length of the door frame, all the way down, and then also at the top, if the top is also tight. Once this has been hammered back into place and no longer scraping against the door, you might want to drive a series of 3-inch long screws, drive them below the surface of the wood, so that way the screw heads don't stick up. So once you drive the screws in, it'll have the effect of pulling this door frame up against the stud that's behind it. So once it pulls it against it, it'll go ahead and keep the door frame from popping out again, and then possibly scraping up against the door and causing all those annoying problems that we discovered. Door frame's been hammered back in. Let's see how the door fits. Let's see if anything rubs still. No rubbing. And up at the top corner on the left of the screen, this was where the worst rubbing was. So now it's perfectly quiet, it's smooth, nothing's touching. And also, where the brass strike plates are, there's no rubbing either. So for the doorknob door latch and for the deadbolt, nothing. You hear nothing, you see nothing. So hammering the door frame back in, using the metal bar, pushed it back enough that it's no longer rubbing or scraping. We still have a problem with the deadbolt sticking or rubbing up hard against the metal. So still have to file that down and replace out the latch here, because this does not always retract. Yep. Gets stuck, it's going to have to be replaced. Find it at any hardware store for just a few dollars. And let's go ahead and give it a try. Now that was smooth. There was no rubbing. So you can feel it being smooth as butter. And also you don't feel any grittiness on the top of the deadbolt scraping the metal. These doorknobs and latches are very easy to replace. Just take out the Phillips screws on the door latch and the Phillips screws on the inside of the doorknob. Once the screws are out, you can just pull the doorknobs straight out. If they don't come out, push down on the latch and then pull out on the doorknobs. They should come out freely. This is the old set that we just took out the door, and this is the new set. And this is a quick set lock. Let's go ahead and match them up. You might run into an issue with the length. So we have the new latch and the old one. And you notice that it is a little longer. This is where the doorknob goes straight through. So the older one is shorter. On this newer one, it has an adjustment that lets us pull this stem in and out. So we'll go ahead and we'll adjust it, and it will push it this way, so it'll be a little shorter to match the original. There's a pin that is spring loaded. It goes up and down. It's on this side and on the back. Once you push the pin down on the front and on the back, you have to pull both sides down. When you pull them down, you're basically pushing this stem this way to the left. See the markings? It shows it as being 2 3/4 when it's extended, or 2 3/8. So this is shorter. We'll have to pull it into the 2 3/8 position. We now have the stem adjusted. It's at the shorter length now, the 2 3/8. You compare it side by side, you notice it is exactly the same now, from where this is to here. Let's go put the new set on the door. So this is the new latch on the door, and these are the screws. So just screw it back in. You might want to screw the latch in first, so that way it stays in place and it doesn't move. Then you can mount your doorknobs back on. Incidentally, if you want to make this stronger, instead of using these short screws, put in 3-inch long screws. Go right into the door, and it'll help secure it. So if somebody tries to kick the door open, it'll be harder for them to do it. Using longer screws basically only works if the door is solid. This door is solid. A lot of interior doors are not. We have the latch screwed in place. We can't push the doorknob in. That's because we have to push this, push the latch in, and it allows it to go right through. So let's go ahead and push this straight through the door. We have the inside doorknob back on. If you have trouble, just turn it around, because this is key to only fit one way. Once you turn it around, especially the lock, it might actually start sliding right in. When you're putting these screws in, it can be a little tricky and difficult because the screws have to actually hit the screw hole on the inside where you see the door here, the edge. So you might have to lift this metal collar up. So this is where it is closed, but you might have to lift it up a little and look underneath and make sure the screw is actually going into the hole right there. And we see right here, it is going into the hole. So let's go ahead and finish tightening things up. The screws for the doorknob are back in place, and the screws for the latch are also back in place. So let's go ahead and open and close the door. Let's see how this thing works. Nice and smooth and quiet, except for the hinges. We'll throw a couple of drops of oil on the hinges, and we'll take care of the creaking sound. We're all done. If you're going to be replacing the door latch doorknob assembly or the deadbolt on your door, you might want to consider getting a metal plate. They sell these in all the big home improvement stores and hardware stores, and I don't have an actual part to show you, but I'm using this piece of bent cardboard as an example. You'll typically find these as a brass colored plate that's shaped like a U, just like this cardboard. And this U-shaped plate is used to go ahead and mount on the door edge. And this plate normally comes out with holes cut out for the screws and for the deadbolt or for the latch assembly. And you'll want to mount this on the door before you put your deadbolt or doorknobs back on. There will also be cutouts on the metal plate on both sides for the doorknobs or for the deadbolt assembly. And once you have this installed, it adds a little extra reinforcement, so you're not just having plain wood, but you're having a metal plate as well. And if you have a metal plate reinforcing the door, and also longer 3-inch screws going into the door itself, you'll buy a lot of extra time if someone tries to force their way in and kick their way through the door.